Welcome to Garden DC, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. This episode, we're speaking with Carol Allen, who's the Insect Index columnist for Washington Gardener magazine. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you.
And lest you think that's all Carol does is write the Insect Index column for our magazine. This is a lady who wears many, many hats, and we're going to peel off some of those layers and those hats throughout this interview, because I think I have 6 different current titles for you and pursuits, and I'm sure there's many more that I don't even know about.
Oh, that's good. I have to keep secrets from somebody.
So the first hat I was going to talk about with you today is as an orchidist. Is that the correct term? Orchid lover?
Yeah.
Orchid expert, because many listeners in our audience will be familiar with you, not just from the column in the magazine, but also from years of seeing you at Benke and having their orchids repotted at Benke Nurseries, which unfortunately had to close last year. But they'll still have that association with you.
Well, once Benke's closed, which broke my heart, because I've been with them for so many years, off and on. Then the last stretch was like 9 years.
Wow.
That I was doing the orchid clinics and the repotting, because it's not just repotting. Mm-hmm. It is a diagnostic clinic, because my degree, I have a master's degree, just a measly master's, not a PhD. My research was done with orchids, and in particular, transfer of virus disease, which is scary for any orchid grower, very scary. So those meetings that I had, those clinics that I had at Benke's, were really about diagnostics. What's wrong with the plant? How can I get someone to grow it better? What can we do? What are the rules of the road when it comes to growing different types of orchids, different species, different hybrids? And what I did, Kathy, and I was pushed into this, not exactly kicking and screaming, by friends of mine who said, you can't stop now just because Benke's is closed. You can't stop. We need you, Carol. So by June of last year, we started holding clinics and repotting clinics that were open to the public by invitation. I have a mailing list, and they're held at different people's homes. And it was quite a scary venture. I didn't know, oh my gosh, how's this going to work? And it was splendid. It is everything that we did at Benke's. And then, of course, the hostess usually decides, well, I'm having company. So there's food, there's congeniality, people hang, they talk. So I've got this whole little group of people of about like 200 right now is what my mailing list is. And we're going to pick it up now that COVID-19, I think we have a better handle on it. And I am going to start holding clinics again, probably the first part of July. I don't know if I can get my act together by June, but they'll be masked, they'll be distanced, and there'll be a limited number of people in the area. They'll be held out on a friend's back patio, back garden, which is a splendid place to hold the clinics. So I will be starting those up again, and you can follow me on my Facebook page, Orchid Lady Carol. And you can always drop me a line and say, hey, put me on your mailing list. I want to come see you. So that we haven't stopped. I couldn't stop. There were too many people even now. I'm getting messages saying, Carol, I have orchids that need you. Where are you? And I'm like, okay, we're going to do this.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful gathering, and pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, we can get together and see you. And what do you recommend for frequency of repotting at orchids? Say you bought one or got one of those moth orchids, say somebody gave you one from a florist or supermarket and is starting to get a little sad or leggy, what's your recommendation for that?
Well, Kathy, I don't know about you, but
Mm-hmm.
you go into like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, and have
Mm-hmm.
you noticed that they put the blooming plants right by the door?
Oh,
Okay, right
yes.
by the door,
Mm-hmm.
and there you are, you're thinking, oh, I've got to do grocery shopping, and what am I going to cook for dinner? And then there's all this beauty, and you go, oh, one of those is going to jump in my cart. And I think that's why a lot of people get orchids, because it's that spontaneous, oh my God, I need this, particularly in times of stress. Are we a little stressed now? Yeah, just a little.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when you get a blooming moth orchid, the important thing is to give it a little bit of sun or very bright indirect light. Don't put it in the credenza in the dark dining room, except for very short periods of time, because these guys never take a break. They're always photosynthesizing. They're always gathering those resources for continued bloom and repeat bloom. So a little bit of direct morning sun through a window, not outside, guys, through a window, or very, very bright indirect light. I call it squinty light. You walk into the room and you go squint, you feel those crow's feet. Didn't want to do that. And then the important thing is to let it dry out between waterings. They are a drought adapted plant. I know, jungle, wet, humid, you think, what do you mean drought? Yeah, they have the same metabolism as a cactus. So that's your first two, number one, number two rules. Sunlight and bright indirect is just fine, but always inside, not outside. And then let them go dry between waterings. Don't do the silly shot glass or the ice cubes or any of that. A lot of times when you get them, they're in a soft pot with a hole in the bottom that sits in a cachepot. So when you
Mm.
get your orchid, pull that soft pot out so you establish, hey, oh, wait a minute, I can take this little plastic pot to the sink. I can run water through it. It will run out, let it drain, then put it back in the cachepot. The best way to kill an orchid is to let it sit in water. And people don't understand that when you get it in the ceramic cachepot, it's a two-part deal. There's that soft pot inside. Separate those out. In fact, I usually recommend put a little something in the bottom so that that soft pot is held up a little bit so it's easy to grab out. And then the
Mm.
repotting thing. So sad as it may seem, this is a throwaway plant. They didn't ask me, don't blame me, but it is a throwaway plant. It's meant to be enjoyed for a few weeks, and then you're going to get tired of it. I know you guys out there are not going to get tired of it, but these are manufacturers and they think marketing and they're going to want you to throw it out. Don't do that. Because what you want to do is as soon as it's out of bloom the first time, you want to repot it. Now, what do you repot it in? Oh, here you need some guidance. Because if you're growing on a windowsill in the mid-Atlantic states, you're going to have several different types of media combinations to choose from. My preference is lightly packed, and not even packed, but fluffed sphagnum moss. We use a premium quality sphagnum. You water it thoroughly and deeply. Remember to move that root, take that little soft pot out of the cachepot, take it to the sink, run the water through, and then you don't water it again until it gets absolutely crunchy on top. And that's what I like about sphagnum moss. It's really, really easy to tell when it's time to water. If you have it in a bark-based medium, or maybe a chip and sphagnum, ground sphagnum like peat moss blend, it's harder to tell. Now, the
Mm.
soft pots they come in are clear, and you can kind of see it dry down. Remember that this is a drought-adapted plant. It has the same metabolism as a cactus. So if you let it go dry 2 days longer than you thought you should have, maybe you were on vacation, got away for the weekend, or got busy, don't worry about it. You're going to have a better chance of doing harm to your orchid to water it prematurely. So let it go crunchy on top in the moss. In the bark, you kind of have to tell by the dryness as it dries down in that clear pot. The thing you don't want to do is water on a time basis. Plants don't have day timers. They don't dry out by the day of the week. They're going to dry out by the amount of sun they get. What are they doing now? Are they growing? Are they sitting there looking cute? Are they blooming? They're going to have different water uses based on the weather, your environment, and what the plant is doing. So repot as soon as it's out of bloom the first time, and then every year thereafter. And those are the big three: sunlight, proper watering, annual repot after the first time.
Wow, that is a great mini lesson on orchids right there, Carol. And I have to I was gonna say, admit to being an orchid killer once or twice by overwatering, over loving, and letting it sit in water. Because yeah, I thought, oh, it's looking kind of sad. It needs extra water. No, but I have
No.
no, I have learned that lesson a few times over, and my current orchids are doing well and actually reblooming. So I'm super happy
Yay.
about that. Yay! So
Absolutely. Yay. Yeah.
what do you remember your first orchid? Do you remember back to there?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I went at orchids in a two-part way. I started working with native terrestrial orchids when I was a teenager. My parents had just moved down to Alexandria, and my mom gave me the side yard. I had big towering oak trees, um, filtered sunlight, and oh boy, did I have a good time. Of course, back in those days, this is the dark ages we're talking about, guys. Uh, a little after the caveman, but not by much. Um, all of our native wild plants were collected, all right, and you could get them for dirt cheap. And there wasn't much information on trying to get some of these plants in general, the trilliums and the spring beauties and all of those, the Virginia bluebells. There wasn't any information out there, Kathy. So what people would do was they would buy from these distributors, people that would go up on the mountains and just collect. And you'd kind of plant them and pray and observe and hope that you could get the right spot and the right culture. Of course, orchids don't take kindly to that, particularly native terrestrial orchids. So I can't say that my first forays into orchid growing in the native orchids was all that thrillingly successful. Can't talk. I did. I was marginally successful, but then, of course, life intervened and I went off to college. So my second introduction to orchids was I was at a local nursery, and this is before the days of big growers, importing from Holland, importing from Taiwan. This is way before the Phalaenopsis was so readily available. But this particular local nursery would get extra plants from members of the National Capital Orchid Society, and if they wanted to sell them, and there were several people who sold that way, and when they're in bloom, they would display them. Well, needless to say, I saw a Phragmipedium. This is a South American lady slipper. It was pink. It was gorgeous. It was bold.
Mm-hmm.
I bought it. Don't you always just like buy and then figure out, now what am I going to do with it? That's exactly what I did. So Phragmipediums need full sun. They like to be moist all the time, counter to what I just told you about the Phalaenopsis, the moth orchid. They grow streamside. And so I bought it because it was beautiful, of course. And fortunately, the guy's name was on the tag, and I called him up. And he was wonderful. He invited me over to his greenhouse. I listened with rapt attention. I got involved in the National Capital Orchid Society, and I was with the Orchid Society for over 20 years.
Wow, it's that's such a blessing to have a mentor like that, and to have somebody take you under their wing and share their orchid wisdom.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to understand, when I came back to orchids, I was already pretty well established as a professional horticulturist. So it wasn't like he was speaking to a total newbie. I knew how to grow plants. I've been growing plants since I was a kiddo. But it was just wonderful to have him as a mentor. He is gone now, gone to the great orchidarium in the sky. But I will never forget. I will never forget him. He was wonderful.
Wow, what a treasure.
Yeah.
You mentioned kiddo, let's talk about little Carol. How you got into plants. Were you the type of little girl who liked to make mud pies and get dirty, or did somebody take you under their wing even back then and show you the plant world?
Well, this is really kind of interesting because it was a little bit of both. So I come from a long line of women gardeners. My mother's mother, of course, had a garden to feed her children. That was a Depression era, and if you wanted food, you had to grow it. And she kept chickens, and she would trade eggs to the dairy up the street to get milk, and she churned her butter. And of course, they ate off of the garden. So my mom grew up with that kind of influence, but my mother took it into ornamental gardening. And she tells the story of when I was not even walking, that if she wanted to go out in the garden, she'd lay a blanket out in the shade where she was weeding, and she'd plop me down, and there I would be in the garden. So when I began toddling, of course, I had her guidance of, no, don't touch that flower. We smell it. We don't touch it. I can remember kind of bringing her a caterpillar. Mommy, mommy, look at this pretty caterpillar. She was probably going, die, caterpillar, die. But she didn't want to traumatize me. So she said, oh, honey, let's take it over here and let it go. So I must have been no more than 6 or 7. And my mother was never able to throw out the tops of carrots because we could get carrots with tops on it in those days. Avocados, my mother loved avocados. There was never a pit that was thrown out. So by the time I was 9 or 10, my windowsills were lined with jars of avocados in various stages of sprouting. The first mango I ever ate, what did Carol do? She planted it. Yeah, I can remember the first time we got a case of grapefruit from Florida, and we opened up one of the grapefruit, and it was very ripe, tree ripened, so the seeds had started to sprout. What did I do? I planted them. So I had mom's influence, Nana's influence, but I have taken it so far beyond what both of my mentors, my familial mentors, ever did.
And then you pursued a degree in biology, botany, or what was your first degree?
My first degree was in biology. I was actually going to go into veterinary medicine, but life intervened. Life does. And I can remember being at a career kind of crossroads when I was in my probably early 20s, and my friends looking me square in the eye and saying, if you don't go into horticulture, we're never speaking to you again. Because at that point, I was an avid gardener. I was an avid botanist. I love to go out in the woods and identify plants. Because remember, I started with native plants. So I would ramble the woods. How I didn't just stay coated in poison ivy rash, I'll never know. So I pursued it both on the amateur level and very soon on the professional level.
And looking at your resume, you worked for a time at the U.S. Botanic Garden. Could you talk a
Oh,
little about
yeah.
that?
Oh, boy, you talk about a pig in strawberries. So I was supervisory horticulturist at the United States Botanic Garden Conservatory, and I got to help all of the gardeners put in their displays. I would plan the seasonal displays as well, buy in some color. Sometimes we didn't grow everything in those days. But I would say that the biggest thing, and really kind of kicked off another love, was I was acting IPM, Integrated Pest Management Director. And this was an immersion course. I'd already played around with the pest, the predator, the host interactions in my own way, but now I was in it for serious. And in those days, and still, when it's open, when we don't have COVID-19 to deal with, the USBG is open 365 days out of the year. So now that may not mean much to you guys, but it doesn't give us time to control pests through an application of a pesticide. So I was held to a strict IPM program with I could not use anything with a re-entry time of greater than 4 hours. So all pesticides have a re-entry time. In other words, a time between the spray and when people can come back in safely. The minimum is 4 hours. So I would get up and my gardeners would get up and we would be at the BG by about 4:30 and we would spray from 4:30, 5 o'clock until opening at 10 o'clock. Well, actually, we sprayed for the first hour and then it was the
Mm-hmm.
re-entry time. So we manipulated it so that we had 4 hours. We had to finish by 6. So between 4:30 and 6, we would spray. Then everybody was out of the houses so that the reentry time would pass by before we opened at 10 o'clock. And what I ended up doing by your tax dollars, thank you very much, was I learned how to use beneficials. And my boss at that time was just like, run with it, Carol. So I got to know people like Stanton Gill, Karen Rain, Ethel Dutke, all of the folks at UMD to help me put together a control program using either just oils or soaps, which have a reentry time of 4 hours, or the release of beneficials. And I had a blast. I found that beneficial insects in a greenhouse work marvelously well when you take away all of the pesticides, which I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't use because they had a reentry time of greater than 4 hours. So I really kept my eye teeth on that, went back to school, took a lot of courses in integrated pest management, took a lot of courses in plant pathology because, of course, because disease pathogens are just as cool as pests, and how you can outwit them, out manipulate them. Can you use a beneficial fungus to control a nasty fungus? Ah, yes, you can. So there's this whole interaction between pest and pathogen and predator and parasite and working with the plant's natural immune system so that a lot of times you can outwit those things that are really bugging you in the garden.
Well, Carol, you're one of the few people I know who would describe plant pathogens as cool.
To me, Kathy, it's a challenge. I get this pathogen and I'm like, oh, cool. How can I outwit this one? Because again, I had that period of time at the USBG where I couldn't use chemicals. And yet I had to deliver a beautiful botanic garden. And I think one of the moments of pride that I had. So most of my gardeners after 10 o'clock went back down to the production facility to work in their various houses and grow the plants that make up the botanic garden collection. I was the person who stayed behind, which means that I interacted with the public. So you can imagine my joy, pride, a little bit of embarrassment when a gentleman came in and asked the receptionist, could he speak to the integrated pest management director? Well, they called me up, and here was this dignitary from China. He ran a botanic garden, one of the big botanic gardens in China, and he said, he had pretty good English, so we could communicate. And he said, I don't see any pests. What are you doing? And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, oh, baby, I can show you pests. So I took him on a tour and I talked about our IPM program. And it was just such a wonderful connection to make with someone halfway across the world who did the same thing as me and thought I did a good job. I wasn't showing him the real pockets of disease and nastiness that I had hidden away, but they were there.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking of nastiness and disease pockets and good bugs and bad bugs, um, recently on the insect index column, we tried to keep it more on the positive, I think. I think in the last issue, we wrote about spring, that smell of spring. Could you describe that a little bit?
Well, I don't have my notes in front of me, so you're going to
Mm-hmm.
embarrass me. But so Oh, Kathy, you should have told me. You should have warned me, because I'm like, oh my God. Now I got to pull up the article. What did I do? So ah,
It was the
there is
springtails.
it
Yeah.
the springtails, but so it was a, oh gosh, not an enzyme. What was it? It was probably
Oh,
a protein.
Geism.
Yeah, but I'm trying to figure out, what
Yeah.
was it? Was it a protein? Was it a, what was it? But anyway, it was an odor that is naturally occurring in soil, the soil microbes. And it's something that humans are particularly sensitive to. We can smell it a mile away. It's that smell that you get with fresh earth. And scientists were wondering, well, wait a minute, why is it so abundant in soil? Why would this chemical this enzyme or whatever it was, be so prevalent? And it turns out, with a little bit of exploration, that springtails are attracted to the bacteria that produce this odor, and they eat them. It's food. Well, wait a minute. You're going to say, oh, wait a minute, that's not so good for the bacteria that produce this odor, because aren't they going to get eaten? Well, when they get eaten, this is ultimate sacrifice for population dynamics, their spores get carried by the springtails, because the springtails are much more mobile through the soil profile than the bacteria are. So the springtails are very sensitive to this odor that the bacteria produce. The springtails would go and find them, and you've got a lot of competition in the soil profile. You've got nematodes, you've got all kinds of other critters that also want to eat the bacteria. But because they co-evolved all around this odor that the bacteria produces, the springtails had the competitive edge. They would know where the bacteria was, their food source. The bacteria had the springtails to carry their spores throughout the soil profile, thereby increasing their population. And that gave them, even though the individual was sacrificed as food, that gave the population the competitive edge. Now, why do people smell it? Beats me.
Mm-hmm.
So we are very sensitive to that odor. And I don't think that the researchers really understood what the connection would be, because we don't eat that bacteria in the soil. At least I don't.
No. And for listeners, that scent we're describing is that scent of freshly turned earth in the springtime that kind of gets released into the air, and you can't really place what that is. You just know you love it. You just like, fresh, just freshness, I guess, would be the description of it.
Yeah, but earthy too. It's and of course for you and me, because we garden, it's aligned with the pleasure of pulling out that weed and the pleasure of seeing the dahlia bloom or the peonies bloom or the cleome seeds germinate or the peas germinate in the early spring, knowing yum, 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 I'm going to have peas, or I'm going to have zucchini, or I'm going to have whatever it is. We associate that with generally with pleasure, even over the fact, the inconvenience of, yes, the tiger mosquitoes are out and I have to spray myself with a repellent. I don't know about you, Kathy, but that smell overrides all of the inconvenience.
So there must be something in it
Must be
that's calling
something.
to us. Yeah, must be
Yeah.
something that, Mother Nature is working her magic on us, and some pheromones, something there that's pulling
Yeah.
us outside.
Yeah.
So, good bugs versus bad bugs. So you described a little bit of integrated pest management, and in a previous episode of the podcast, we talked to Heather Zindash in
Yeah.
depth on IPM principles. But what I wanted to ask you is favorite insects, most hated insects.
Well, I already mentioned the most hated. Mosquitoes.
Yes.
Those little bloodsuckers. I'm sorry. It's all about me, Kathy. Come on, it's all about me. But in the garden, there's so many pests, if you vegetable garden, that are just the dickens to control. You've got cucumber beetles, you've got squash vine borers, to the nasty ones that I always get questioned about. And, what do you do about them? Oh, flea beetles that come in hordes and
Yes.
just run through your garden. And by the time that you notice the fact that everything is half defoliated, you're going, what, whoop, they've already moved
Mm-hmm.
on. There's a lot of challenges in vegetable gardening. And when you think about it, you've got all of that luscious stuff out there for the insects to eat on. And you have to understand that. So we're going to talk about plant defense. I hope you want to know about plant defense.
Mm-hmm.
So people like to eat plants that don't produce a lot of chemical defenses. Yeah, I know, mint, okay, that odor that we love. Well, that's a secondary metabolite. That's a defense compound. And the poor mint plant evolved to discourage herbivores. Well, they didn't discourage us, did they? And then the smell of brushing through a tomato plant, isn't that odor just wonderful? Makes your mouth start to water. That's a defensive compound. That tomato plant co-evolved with that scent to try to discourage the herbivores. They missed on us. So,
I was going to say I actually hate that smell, but go on.
oh, you're one of the few. Most
I'm
of the
one of the
time I
few
mention to it, guys say,
yeah.
yeah. So,
I do love tomatoes, but just tomato foliage is just mm-mm.
yeah, no, I
Just
love this.
something sour about it. I just don't like
Yeah.
it.
But know now that that is a defensive compound, and it was
Mm-hmm.
to keep the co-evolved herbivores, the cows of the last millennia or whatever was eating the tomato foliage. And it comes down to the insects too. So most plants out there in the plant world have these secondary compounds, but humans like the ones that don't have secondary defensive compounds. We like all those mild, yummy vegetables with
Mm-hmm.
not really strong tastes. Yeah. And that means in our gardens, we gather all of these yummy things together. They don't have a plethora of we don't eat eucalyptus. All right.
Mm.
Eucalyptus has a strong smell. We don't eat it. All right. Um, so that eucalyptus smell is that secondary defensive compound that keeps insects from eating it. So our vegetable gardens are a little hotbed of every herbivore insect come eat all of the plants that I've put here. And that
Mm.
makes insect control a little bit harder because we have all these luscious plants in one spot. So it's smorgasbord. Now,
Mm.
what can you do about that? Well, I always urge people to definitely select your seed source, select your variety for for pest and disease resistance. The breeders have worked hard to help stack the deck in your favor. Um, Sometimes we use things like barriers, the spun bonded polyester that we put over the kale crops, the kale, cabbage, cauliflower,
The
broccoli, all of that
mm-hmm.
group. You can put a barrier over it to keep the cabbage moths off. So you don't even have to spray with anything because you've encased them in this netting or this fabric. You can't do that with beans and cucumber beetles because you've got to open it up for pollination. You've got to get the beneficials in there, your pollinators in there. But you can cover them up during their youth so that they get to be a strong plant before the cucumber beetles come and try to ravage them.
Mm-hmm.
So you can use barriers. You can use trap plants. I mentioned flea beetles. Flea beetles are very attracted to radish plants. So if you had one side of your garden where you had radishes, the flea beetles would go savage the radishes, and conceivably you could either use like an oil spray or a soap spray there, or just gather them all up in a plastic bag real quick before they run away and put them in the trash, and that way you could decrease your population of flea beetles. Don't you wish you could do that? They move pretty fast. But knowing
Yeah.
but like thrips, sometimes thrips will get on squash blossoms and drive us crazy. Well, they like members of the chrysanthemum family better. So plant a row of marigolds. They'll be on the marigolds where maybe you can, take the flowers off or use one of your organic sprays on the marigold flowers, not when the bees are there, to trap the thrips and to keep them off the squash blossoms. So this is what I mean by I really like the challenge of outwitting the pest. So those are just a couple of examples that you can use.
Excellent advice.
Thank
And
you.
that was some of the bad bugs that we encounter in our garden. Japanese beetles are something that I get a lot of questions about from readers and listeners, particularly those who want to grow roses. So that's more on the ornamental side of
Yeah,
things.
yeah. And Japanese beetles can be a real pain in the you know what. Um, it's good to know, it's refreshing to know, it's hopeful to know that Japanese beetle populations ebb and flow. They rise and then they drop, and we are in a drop. So even though you think that your hibiscus and your roses are getting savaged by them, this is actually less than it could be. So count your blessings. So I like to attack Japanese beetles in a two-pronged attack. And this is the thing about IPM. You're not using the sledgehammer to kill the insect. You're employing the philosophy of many small hammers. So many small controls to outwit or foil the pest or pathogen, rather than just using the nastiest chemical in your arsenal and just beating the heck out of it. So Japanese beetles, many small hammers. The first thing to do is to use a bacteria called milky spore disease, and you apply that to your soil. Usually have to do it a couple of times. And if you're in a suburban area, it's really nice if you can get all of your neighbors to do it, because they can fly up to about a half a mile or to a mile. So the Japanese beetle that you attract to that trap, which you will not use, do not use Japanese beetle traps, people. You will be pulling in every Japanese beetle for a mile radius. Don't do that. That's suicidal. All right.
I always say if you have an arch enemy, that's the greatest gift you could give them is a Japanese beetle trap.
Oh, you never heard it from my mouth, but I think it's a great idea. Anyway, so use milky spore disease, and that's a bacteria that attacks the grub. The Japanese beetle spends most of its life cycle from about July through about May, all right, May, June, in the ground. So they're going to be very, very vulnerable to like predatory nematodes, which are naturally occurring, and you thank God that they do. And this bacteria that likes to give them, well, a terminal case of mummification. Think pleasant thoughts. All right. And then, so use your milky spore, and hopefully that'll decrease the population. I really don't recommend using a hard pesticide on your turf or your garden. It has a lot of beneficial insects that get killed by using a hard pesticide. Sometimes the turf companies will say, oh, you've got Japanese beetle grubs, we need to use blah, blah, blah. And you go, well, maybe let me think about the alternatives. So the milky spore disease is the soft alternative. It doesn't kill anything except the Japanese beetle grubs and their associates, unlike a hard chemical. So take care of the grub that way. Once the Japanese beetle is out, it's going to gravitate towards your roses, your hibiscus, linden trees. It has a couple of favorites. And what I like to get people to do, because I'm just twisted, you get up with the dawn. Yeah, I know, you're laughing at me. You get up with the dawn. The birds are just singing. The air is cool. You take your cup of coffee and a bowl of about maybe 6 to 8 inches in diameter and about as equally deep. And you half fill it with water. You put a squirt of dishwashing liquid in it. And you go out, and remember, they're sleeping now. You can catch them. So it's important to know that beetles have this behavior that, again, stacks the deck to you. Beetles, when they're disturbed, drop and then fly. So if you carry your bowl of soapy water, you put it underneath the cluster of flowers, and you just tap on the flowers, chances are you're going to get the majority of the beetles that will fall into the sudsy water. Now, people, you don't even have to touch them at this point. The
Mm-mm.
soap in the water keeps them from resurfacing and flying out. And then you dump the whole thing in the toilet and you flush it away. Now, if you get really nasty and conniving like I am, I'll squash the little you-know-whats with my bare hands. Yeah. At first, I squealed like a girl when I did it. And then I put on gloves, and my hate for Japanese beetles grew to the point where if my gloves were back at the house and I was out with whatever plant it was, I just squashed them between my thumb and my forefinger. But I understand most people are not going to be able to do that because they've got
Nope.
brown junk in them and it's icky.
Mm.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Use your sudsy water first thing in the morning. They drop before they fly, and use your milky spore disease on your turf and in your garden beds so that you get the bacteria working for you.
Hmm. And that satisfying multi-prong approach.
Again, it's the
Yeah.
philosophy of many small hammers.
Hmm. Now, for insects that you love, who do you want to bring to your garden, and who do you just delight and say, I cannot wait till that time of year that I see so and so?
Oh, I love wheel bugs.
Hmm.
They are big, they're about an inch and a half long. They've got this projection on their back like some kind of wheel with spikes on it. They have a piercing mouth part. They move fairly slow. They are winged. They can fly. When you see them in the garden, don't handle them because they will bite you defensively and you will not be a happy camper. They don't go
Hmm.
after you. All right. Don't be afraid of them. But neither are you going to have your 10-year-old say, oh, Mom, I found a wheel bug. I want to go catch it. You go, oh, let's go take a look at it first. Don't catch it. Watch it. They are wonderful predators. They've even adapted to, I think, they've learned how to eat brown marmorated stink bugs.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's
Hey.
pretty good. I know the
Yeah.
praying mantises have figured out about brown marmorated stink bugs. I think the wheel bugs have too. So you're going to see them more towards the end of summer, early fall, when the bugs that eat plants abound because that's their food. So their life cycle is going to follow that end of summer where we have an abundance of insects. So I would say that's one of my favorite bugs.
Nice. Well, a little bit of a left turn here from bugs to trees. So, not too
Mm-hmm.
long ago, you got your certification as an arborist, and talk about why you decided to do that.
Okay, so it's wasn't a little while ago, Kathy. We go back a long time. It's been almost a decade. Just saying,
Wow.
just saying. Yeah, I know, I know. Well, the problem here is that I love too many different kinds of plants, and I love woody plants. I love shrubs. I love trees. Um, I guess on my own property, maybe this started back. Oh gosh, when I first moved to my property. Well, we were caught in a drought. Remember what a drought is? That was a few years ago. We haven't had one in a while. And I mean a prolonged drought. The water table had dropped. And I have a property that's nestled into the southern end of Seneca Creek State Park. So I've got tulip poplars, I've got hickories, I've got oaks. I started losing my oak trees, my big mature oak trees. So I called in the arborist that was assigned to Seneca Creek State Park. And we talked about environmental changes that set up for trees to fail. And it was this dropped water table. Well, things have changed since then. And I've learned as I went along more and more about environmental conditions. I learned more and more about the importance of tree cover. Our cities, our suburbs suffer from too much heat in the summer times. In some of our areas in the city, this excessive heat that we get, people die. Um, and we can counter that by increasing the amount of tree cover in our cities and in our suburban areas. And I guess it also goes hand in glove with when I look at turf, I see a wasted space. That is an area of plant material. It's a monoculture. It's an alien plant. It's not well adapted to our region that we live in, and it's not giving back. It's not supporting the ecosystem. It's not controlling this excessive heat that we get when we lose tree cover. So I guess I'm one of those rebels that not only would encourage people to plant more native plants that are appropriate. You don't have to go whole hog. I like the 15%, 85% rule. 15% for you, non-invasive, please, but try to do 85% native plants. Increase your tree cover. First of all, it cools your house. It's going to cut your air conditioning bill. It decreases this heat island effect, which is the official term for cities and suburban areas that get too hot because they don't have that tree cover. Trees are natural air conditioners. It's the start of creating more of a dynamic ecosystem in your particular property. If you can get your neighbors to join you, if you can get your common area to go back to more tree dominant, woody plant dominant, which is normal for the mid-Atlantic states, type of environment, then you're going to find all of these wonderful bugs. And, we're talking worldwide about the decrease of insects and the impact that the decrease of insects has. I love bird watching. I'm a lazy bird watcher. I like them to come to me. So my way of getting birds to watch is to create habitat. So in your own property, you want to increase the number of woody plants, shrubs, mid-sized trees, shade trees. You want to increase diversity, your biodiversity, so that you've got ground covers, you've got herbaceous perennials, you've got shrubs of many different kinds. And that 85%, 15% rule, I think really is a nice compromise between, oh, you've got to go all native or I don't care. And the whole point is to decrease the heat island effect, increase tree canopy cover, increase biodiversity, and have more fun stuff happening out in your garden. You've got insects to watch. You've got birds to watch. Then, I'm sorry, I like snakes, okay? You're going to have frogs, you're going to have toads, you're going to have snakes. So you want to create more of a biodiverse and well-rounded ecosystem in your own space.
Well, as listeners can hear, Carol is full of lessons and wonderful advice. And you've been an instructor recently at Montgomery College, at the University of Maryland, giving talks at local public gardens like Brookside. But where could somebody get a hold of you, maybe for a personal consultation? Do you take individual clients?
I do. And I've learned with the COVID-19 that I can do a lot virtually. I've done a couple of designs virtually. That's not my main squeeze, is designing, but I do love it, and I do take on a few clients. I would say that probably the best way to get a hold of me is through my Facebook, Orchid Lady Carol, and don't be put off by that says orchids, because I don't discriminate. I love all plants. So you can reach me through there. And that's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
I was also going to say that listeners could contact us through the magazine or through our website, and we could always forward on an email to you as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, orchidladycarol@gmail.com is a more direct route if you don't have Facebook.
Terrific. And what is growing in your garden this week?
Oh, wow. You would ask. So orchids, of course. Come on, Kathy. Jeez. So one of the things that I absolutely adore about my habitat that I partially, after the oak trees died out, and they did, I lost a lot of oak trees, I replanted more native plants. I love hummingbirds. So I have the perfect habitat for hummingbirds to just settle on in, raise their babies, and entertain me at the feeder. Now, I also plant a lot of plants to support them. One of the best expenditures of money, best investments in my property was deer fencing, because we got them, not as much now, there's a little population decline where I am, but not by much, mainly because we have more coyotes. We won't talk about that. But I put up deer fencing, and when I did, I found that the native touch-me-not jewelweed started to really abound. I mean, I would have just great patches of it. Well, the hummingbirds think that that's the best thing since sliced bread. So I put out my feeders, usually when the azaleas are in bloom. So end of April, first part of May. And I did have my feeders out this year. And in spite of the freeze, yes, I had hummers. And then I have plants that I know will support them and entice them. So I'm long on Cuphea and I'm long on salvias. And that's tough for me because I've got a shady yard. So I have these one or two little patches of sun, and I get in salvias so that I have things for them to nosh on when they don't want to nosh on my feeder. I also have our native trumpet vine, okay, Lonicera sempervirens. Sorry, I speak Latin. That's our native trumpet creeper with the orange blossoms. They love that. I have bignonia, which is also an orange trumpet flower that they love. And then by that time, my salvias are in bloom. They like the azaleas. My touch-me-not's not in bloom. That's a late summer thing. I usually start out with a fuchsia, and I hang that right by my feeder like they don't know where the feeders are. An important thing to know about hummingbirds, if you want them, find a place for your hummingbird feeder, if you're new to this, where you can see it. And it can be on the deck rail. They are bold, they are brazen, and they don't give a fig about you. Their feeding habits are called, they're trap line feeders, which means like the trappers of old that would put out traps to catch animals. We don't talk about that. That's not nice. But they would have a trap here and then a space and a trap there and a space and a trap there that came into a big circle until it came back to their home base. So hummingbirds do the same thing. They learn where the flowers are, and they go from location to location to location to location. So you can put your hummingbird feeder where you want to see it. They don't care about your deck. They don't care about your dog. They don't really even care about your cat. God knows they don't care about me. And then sit back and enjoy. And again, I stack the deck a little bit. If you're just starting out with hummingbird feeders, try to get as many flowers that will attract the hummingbirds as possible, like that orange trumpet vine, that Lonicera sempervirens is a good one to go with. Don't poo-poo your azaleas. They do like those. The fuchsia, again, that's not native, but because hummingbirds migrate, they actually have a broad palette. I also like to put out some red, screaming red impatiens, but they don't need red necessarily to be attractive. And then I lay in my salvias, my Cuphea, and a whole bunch of other plants to support them through the summer until my touch-me-not comes into bloom. And that usually rounds out my hummingbird smorgasbord.
You say Cuphea, I say Cuphea.
Well, yeah, okay. Cuphea. You know,
the Latin, yeah.
You know, whatever.
Yes, the bat plant.
You know, but the thing of it is that even we pronounce it slightly differently. Did we know what we were talking about?
Exactly.
And I really encourage people, if you're just starting out in horticulture, go ahead, you know, tighten your belt, take on Latin binomials. It is the language of the industry. And hopefully you'll never have to deal with a person who will make fun of your pronunciation. Hopefully you will find enough people who will gently say, it's Cuphea, not Cuphea, or whatever. I applaud people who take that extra step to learn more. And that Latin binomial is part of learning more.
Yeah, and I've heard the saying never to make fun of somebody who mispronounces a word, because that means they learned it from reading it, not from hearing it. Yep.
Yes. And now that we have a plethora of podcasts and webinars, you're going to hear people pronounce things. And oh my gosh, if you tune into some of the gardening channels from across the pond, you're going to hear a totally different pronunciation. Don't let anybody ever put you down for a mispronunciation. Don't let that happen.
That is great advice. And while you're learning, you're going to make mistakes, and maybe you'll stumble across the correct pronunciation at some point. And then, but really, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that serious.
Oh, I do have one tip. Missouri
Mm-hmm.
Botanic Garden. I love the
Mm-hmm.
Missouri Botanic Garden when I'm directing a person to look up a plant. Oh, because guys, if you haven't figured it out now, when you go to the nurseries, those tags, they're written by marketing people. They've got all the buzzwords that's going to sucker you into buying that, but they're not necessarily correct on sizes and time of bloom and all of that. I really direct people to Missouri Botanic Garden website. And Kathy, did you know that they've got a pronunciation guide?
Oh yes, I've used it a few times on my own. So you
Yes,
can
and so
also,
have I.
yep, yep, and that's Mbot. I think is how you can get there
Mobot.
just by, yep, Mobot, by
Mobot.
Googling. And you can also do botanical Latin pronunciation, and type in the word
Yeah.
or copy and paste it into that Google word, and it will actually have, if you turn the speaker on your laptop or your phone, it'll actually say it for you.
La Nicera sempervirens.
And that's probably as nerdy, plant nerdy as we're going to get today.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode, Carol.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
We're definitely going to have you back to talk more about orchids, plant pests, and pathogens in the near future.
I look forward to it.
Thank you, Carol. It's a beautiful late spring, early summer day, and I'm out in my garden to let you know what's blooming now. We're in the pink, literally and figuratively. I have several different dianthus growing, from ground cover versions to container dianthus to a tall perennial variety that is looking incredibly beautiful. I think I might cut a few stalks to bring inside in a vase for me today. Figuratively, the pinks are mostly coming from the hydrangea arborescens, the smooth hydrangeas, which are blooming up a storm right now. I have several of the Invincibelle series, Invincibelle Spirit being a pale pink, Invincibelle Ruby being a dark pink, and those are looking quite beautiful in the mixed border right now. I still have some Astilbe, which are in different shades of pink blooming, and I also have a tall, I would say mid-range Asiatic lily called Purple Dream. It has purple speckling in the center, but the flower is basically, I think, a deep magenta more than a purple. So let me know what's blooming in your garden. You can follow me on Instagram at WDC Gardener to see photos of my recent blooms in the garden. And you can comment there and share pictures on the Facebook page of Washington Gardener Magazine. Plant profile: milkweed. Common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, is an important plant for pollinators in our mid-Atlantic region. The weed in its name can scare some people off, but it is important for local gardeners to add it to our landscapes. Recent studies show that widespread use of pesticides and herbicides have impacted the Asclepias and monarch populations. It is a perennial native to most of the eastern United States. The flower is also a popular nectar source for both honeybees and native bees, as well as hummingbird moth and many other kinds of butterflies. Asclepias syriaca bloom from June and continue through August. In the fall, their seed pods ripen and dry out, splitting to reveal each seed attached to a long, silky fluff that floats away in the breeze. Milkweeds need sun and adequate moisture to get established. Once in place, it is quite hardy and drought-tolerant. Its rhizome goes straight down, forming a taproot, stabilizing the single-stalk plant above ground and providing the plant with resources hidden deep when needed. It can be hard to start from seed, and is difficult to transplant due to that long taproot, but give it a few tries and you'll eventually have success. It tends to run a bit and pops up here and there, growing to about 5 feet tall, so plant it in a mixed bed with other sun-loving native perennials such as Echinacea, Rudbeckia, Solidago, Asters, and Coreopsis. This is especially important because pollinators need groups and clumps of flowers to thrive. If some of the leaves on your plant start to look ragged and chewed on, great! The plant is doing its job providing food for the next monarch generation. The toxic milky latex that Asclepias exudes when a stem is broken make them inedible for deer and rabbits, while monarch butterflies can eat the leaves at their caterpillar stage, and that makes the insects in turn unpalatable to birds and other predators. Common milkweed, you can grow that. Thank you for listening to Garden DC. You can become a listener supporter by going to anchor.fm/Kathy-Gents/support. For as little as 99 cents a month, you can become a listener supporter and we'll give you a shout out in a future episode. Another way to support Garden DC is to go to WashingtonGardener.com and subscribe to Washington Gardener magazine. Does gardening have value? I wrote this essay BC, before COVID, but I think it has even more relevance these days. I was recently rereading Depletion and Abundance by Sharon Astic. There is much food for thought in this small book, though one idea stuck with me the most, that the home arts, including gardening, have no value in our current economy. Not only are the efforts of gardeners undervalued, but they are considered a drain on actual quote-unquote productive hours that could be spent earning funds. To do what with that money? To pay others to mow and blow, then endlessly spray to combat weeds and pests for your just-for-show lawn? When we pay for gym memberships to try to get our exercise, we pay someone else to grow our food and deliver it from far away, or we pass out still more money for another person to prepare our food so it is easy and fast to consume. All to get more hours to do more quote-unquote productive work. Meanwhile, we've become increasingly detached from nature in our climate-controlled living and workspaces. We forget these basic skills and then are slaves to the economic system because we need to pay others to do them for us. Let's step back for a minute and think about this. Gardening can be simply a hobby or a pastime, but it can be more. It can be a way to control your part of the economy. You can step out of the rat race and decide consciously how much you want to grow yourself for food, for pleasure, and for the local wildlife. You can demonstrate to others the true value of gardening by sharing that abundance with them and spreading the knowledge as well. Viva la gardening revolution! You can find Washington Gardener online at WashingtonGardener.com, on Twitter at WDC Gardener, on Instagram at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook.com at Washington Gardener Magazine.